Hi guys, so today we're going to talk about deload weeks. So a deload is a period of training designed to help reduce fatigue by lowering the volume and intensity of your training. Well-designed programs will always include some form of deload. So a program is designed to get you better. We achieve this through progressive overload and challenging that body that little bit more every single session. But obviously it's not as easy as that. Because if it was, we could just continually progressively overload our sessions and, well, I'd be lifting a lot heavier than I am at the moment. And this is related to the stress that training causes on our body. It's stress that's important, that's what we need to be able to adapt our body, but this stress causes our body and mind to fatigue. Now, obviously you know that our training causes fatigue because that's why we take rest days and that's why we don't train every single day. We give time for our body and our central nervous system to recover. But during a program, your body and your central nervous system never actually fully recover between each session. So over time, this means that stress and that fatigue is added up week to week. And it means that we get to the point where we can no longer progressively overload and we can no longer actually adapt from the stimulus that we're putting into our body. And this is actually the point that we then need to deload. At this point, the deload allows for increased recovery because you're reducing the volume and intensity of your sessions, which will allow your body to recover more, ready to then go again on your next training block. Now, you might be thinking, you've never heard of a deload, you don't know anyone else that does a deload. Well, there are two reasons for this. The first reason will be that the person just isn't training hard enough to actually fatigue their body enough to actually warrant a deload week. And then the second reason is that deloads might just be happening naturally. So if we take somebody who's maybe not training as consistently as an athlete is, there will be social occasions, there will be weeks when they maybe don't make 3 sessions, they only make 2 sessions, or they'll be out one night and then they'll miss a session, or they won't be training at the same intensity, so they won't really be pushing their body as hard as they should be for that session. This will all allow the body to recover that little bit more. So these are like natural deloads that are actually built in. They're not planned, and they're not the best way to design a program, because if you want to really maximize your performance, it's better to have constructed deload weeks rather than an inconsistent training and intensity. But all the same, these would be classed as deloads and maybe appear why somebody is not necessarily taking deloads all the time. It's because they're actually just, their training is inconsistent and they don't get to the point where they then need to take a deload. So alternatively to this, if you are training consistently and if you are training with intensity, you will get to the point where you will need to deload, because you put yourself at risk of not just overtraining, but performance plateaus, illness, and also injury as well. So everyone does do a deload, but if we can actually program this in, we are more likely to be able to avoid the tiredness, avoid the illness, and avoid any injuries and avoid overtraining, which gives us more time to focus on training consistently and with intensity, both physically and mentally. So, as I said, in your training block, you will progressively stress your body by progressively overloading it each session and building that up throughout the training block. The deload week will then reduce the intensity, reduce the volume to allow your body to recover. So you can reduce the volume, you can reduce the intensity, or you could reduce both. So if we're looking at your session compared to the previous week, which would be the final week of your block, you'd be looking to reduce to about 60 to 70% of the volume intensity compared to that week. Now, volume creates more fatigue than intensity does, so you'd be looking to reduce this first, and then also decreasing the intensity if you feel you need to as well. Okay, so with our deload weeks, you might feel that because you're reducing the intensity and the volume, that you're not actually doing anything anymore, or you're only in the gym for a really short amount of time. That's absolutely fine. That is great. That means you're doing it well. The really important thing to remember here is to not be adding in extra cardio sessions because you feel you should, or not be adding in extra exercises to the end of your session because your session has only lasted half an hour and it's normally 45 minutes. because we need to remember that the deload week is here for a reason. It's to allow your body to recover so that when you're going into your next training block, you can really maximize the training that you're actually doing. If you're adding in extra sessions and you're adding in extra exercises, you're then not actually reducing the intensity or the volume of your training that week. So you're effectively not actually doing a deload week at all. And this will really impact your next training block when you go into it, because you're really not going to be able to train at the intensity that you're really looking to train at. So with our deload week, we're reducing the intensity, we're reducing the volume, but we're not saying to completely rest. We don't want you to completely remove the stimulus, because we know that movement is not only healthy for our body and our mind, but it's also really important for injury prevention. Now, throughout this week, again, it's not a rest week, so you want to be consistent with your sleep and your nutrition, the same as you would be for a normal training session week, because this means that we can really maximize that recovery so we're ready to perform when we go into our next training block from the get-go. So when do we deload? Well, ideally we say that you should be programming this for every 4 to 8 weeks. This takes out any guessing as to whether a deload is needed, and it means that when you're training throughout your sessions and throughout the weeks, you know exactly how long you have until your next deload, so you know how exactly hard you can challenge and push yourself for every single session. The alternative method for a deload is to keep training and monitoring your performance and your recovery and waiting for until you start to feel irritable, really fatigued, really stressed, and these things, when they start affecting your performance, that's when you would take a deload. It's not an approach that we would recommend, reacting to a stimulus, because there are of course a lot of things that could be affecting your athletic performance to cause these feelings. You don't want to be thinking as well about using performance as a metric, because if your performance starts to deteriorate, you might actually already be at a risk of overtraining or in that state, and we don't want to be reaching this state. We want to be getting just before it so that we can deload, so then we're not in overtraining and we can then maximize our performance in our next training block. So we said to deload every 4 to 8 weeks. Personally, I would take a deload after every 6 weeks. For my group coaching, we do every 5 weeks. So it really is up to you as to when you would want to take a deload. In general terms, the higher the intensity and the higher the volume of your training, the more often that you would be looking to do a deload. Ultimately though, whatever approach you choose, you have to think about what is right for you. So if you're feeling really good after 5 weeks, then you might think, I'm going to push it for another few weeks and then take my deload instead of taking it normally after week 5. Alternatively, you might be thinking, after 3 weeks, I really need a deload. I just need a week to recover. Things in life and training, I just feel that I'm just not going to be able to push it for those remaining 2 weeks. I personally felt really good after 6 weeks of training and decided to not take a deload one time, and I kept going and I moved into my next block, and I got to week 3 and I really needed to take a deload, and that made me realise that for my first training block I really should have just taken the deload so that I would have been able to have the adequate recovery and really maximise my next training block, whereas because I'd pushed through, I wasn't able to then maximise my next training block. An alternative way as well to think about it that would be okay is, say you have a holiday 8 weeks away, and you normally train for 6 weeks and then take a deload, then you could just continually keep training until that 8 weeks and push it that little bit more, and then when on your holiday, that could be classed as your deload. This is a really great way actually to sometimes be able to fit your programming and your deloads around, because obviously when you're on holiday you don't typically have access to the same type of equipment and you're often not able to train at the same intensity because of course you're on holiday, you're probably trying to relax a little bit more. So that could be one way that you could move your deload and work it kind of round a holiday. So that gives you lots to think about, but the important things to take away from this are that Deloads are necessary and really important to do, so make sure you're including them in your programming. And the point of them is to reduce the intensity, reduce the volume, and that means that we can train consistently, we can train at intensity, and that we're training hard, but we're also training smart, and we can do this over months and months and months.